Welcome back to the channel, everyone, and if you are new here, make sure you stay till the very end because what you are about to hear is one of the most shocking, unbelievable, and eye-opening stories in the entire history of American coin collecting. A story that proves that even the smallest and most ignored piece of spare change in your pocket could secretly be worth a life-changing fortune. And today we are diving deep into the legendary 1972 1-cent USA coin, a humble penny that most people would never look at twice, yet because of a series of extraordinary errors, minting mistakes, and rare production anomalies, this tiny copper coin has reached an astonishing estimated value of up to $36 million, making it one of the most valuable and mysterious pennies ever known. And what makes this story even more fascinating is that these coins were never meant to be rare, they were mass-produced. Released into circulation, spent at grocery stores, dropped into tip jars, lost in couch cushions, and passed through countless hands without anyone realizing that a small number of them carried mistakes so dramatic and so rare that collectors today would do almost anything to own just one example. So as you listen closely, imagine how many times you yourself may have held a penny, ignored it, or even thrown it away, not knowing that one specific year, one specific error, one microscopic flaw could transform that ordinary cent into a multi-million-dollar treasure. Because the 1972 1-cent coin represents the perfect storm of minting chaos, human error, mechanical malfunction, and historical timing, all colliding in a way that created some of the most sought-after era coins in the world. And to understand why this penny can be worth such an unimaginable amount of money, we need to go back to the early 1970s. A time when the United States Mint was under immense pressure to produce massive quantities of coins due to inflation, population growth, and rising demand for everyday currency, especially cents, which were still heavily used in daily transactions. And in 1972 the Philadelphia Mint, which did not use a mint mark at the time, was operating at full capacity, with coin presses running non-stop, often around the clock, and when production speed increases, quality control often suffers, and that is exactly what happened, leading to one of the most famous and dramatic double die errors in U.S. history, known as the 1972 double die. Obverse Lincoln cent, an error so bold and so visually striking that even someone with no coin knowledge can see it with the naked eye. But beyond this famous error there are multiple layers of additional mistakes, varieties, and anomalies that together explain how certain examples of the 1972 penny have reached values that seem almost impossible, because this is not just one error. It is a collection of rare conditions stacked on top of each other, and at the center of this story is the double die obverse, a minting error that occurs during the die creation process when the die receives multiple misaligned impressions from the hub, resulting in a doubled image on the coin itself. And in the case of the 1972 penny, the doubling is extremely strong, especially on the words Liberty and I in God We Trust, as well as the date itself, where the numbers appear thick, shadowed, and clearly duplicated. And this was not a minor or subtle mistake, this was a major error that should have been caught early, but due to production pressure and human oversight, thousands of these error dies were put into service, striking coins that entered circulation before the mistake was discovered. And once a doubled die is used to strike coins, every coin produced from that die carries the same error. But what truly elevates the value of the most expensive 1972 pennies is the condition and rarity of specific die states. Because not all double die coins are created equal, some were struck early in the die's life, resulting in crisp, sharp doubling with minimal wear, while others were struck later after the die had deteriorated, cracked, or been polished, reducing the clarity of the error. And collectors place enormous premiums on early die state examples that show full, bold doubling combined with pristine surfaces, original luster, and minimal contact marks. But even that alone does not explain a $36 million valuation, because the most valuable 1972 1-cent coins are believed to represent ultra-rare transitional or experimental strikes, coins that may have been struck on the wrong planchet, with incorrect metal composition, or during test runs that were never meant for circulation. And during the early 1970s the U.S. Mint was actively experimenting with alternative metals for cents due to rising copper prices. And while the official transition to zinc-based cents did not occur until 1982, there is strong evidence that experimental alloys and test planchets were already being evaluated years earlier, and if a 1972 double die cent was accidentally struck on one of these experimental planchets, especially one with an unusual metal composition, weight, or magnetic property, its value would skyrocket beyond anything seen in standard era coins, because such a piece would represent a unique historical artifact. A physical record of a secret mint experiment combined with one of the most famous double die errors of all time, and collectors and museums alike would compete fiercely to own it, driving the price into the tens of millions, especially if the coin could be authenticated by advanced metallurgical analysis, showing a composition that does not match any officially released cent of that era. And another factor that contributes to the immense value of certain 1972 pennies is the presence of multiple errors on a single coin, known as a compound error, for example a double die obverse combined with an off-center strike, a broad strike, a clipped planchet, or a wrong metal planchet, and compound errors are exponentially rarer than single errors, because the odds of multiple independent mistakes occurring on the same coin are extremely low, and when such a coin also happens to be from a highly collected series like the Lincoln cent, demand becomes almost limitless, and then there is the matter of preservation. Because most 1972 pennies were heavily circulated, exposed to moisture, chemicals, and physical wear, but a tiny number were saved immediately after minting, perhaps by mint employees, collectors, or sheer luck, and these coins remain in near-perfect condition, graded at the highest levels by professional grading services, and when you combine a bold double die, pristine mint state condition, flawless surfaces, full original red color, and a rare planchet or compound error, you are no longer talking about a normal collectible, you are talking about a once-in-a-generation discovery, something that redefines the upper limits of coin values, and this is where the $36 million figure comes into play, because the coin market is driven not just by rarity, but by storytelling, provenance, and historical importance, and a 1972 penny that can be traced back to an early mint release, authenticated as a unique error combination, and supported by expert consensus becomes a trophy piece. The kind of coin that elite collectors, investment funds, and even national institutions want to own as a centerpiece. And history has shown that when two or more ultra-wealthy collectors compete for a single irreplaceable item, price becomes almost irrelevant, and bids can escalate into staggering territory, especially when the coin represents a defining moment in U.S. minting history, and the 1972 double die cent is exactly that. Often described as the most dramatic double die ever released into circulation, a mistake so obvious that it challenges the assumption that mint errors are always subtle, and this error has been studied, catalogued, and admired for decades, yet new discoveries continue to surface, including previously unknown die varieties, subtle differences in doubling patterns, and unexplained anomalies that suggest more than one double die may exist, each with its own level of rarity. And beyond the famous obverse doubling, some 1972 pennies show reverse anomalies as well, including weak or distorted lettering, misaligned memorial details, and die cracks that indicate extreme stress on the minting equipment, all of which add layers of intrigue and value. And then there is the mystery factor, because not all details about mint operations in 1972 are fully documented or publicly known, leaving room for speculation about how many experimental coins were produced, how many escaped the mint, and how many may still be hiding in old collections, jars, or inherited coin boxes, waiting to be rediscovered. And this sense of possibility is what keeps collectors searching, checking rolls, and examining every 1972 penny they come across. Because the difference between a 1-cent coin and a multimillion-dollar treasure can come down to tiny details, the thickness of a letter, the spacing of a number, the weight of the coin, or the way it reacts to a magnet, and the idea that such value could be hiding in plain sight is incredibly powerful. And it is why stories like this resonate so deeply with people around the world, because they tap into hope, curiosity, and the thrill of discovery. And the 1972 1-cent USA coin stands as a symbol of that dream, proof that mistakes can sometimes create extraordinary outcomes, and that history is not always written perfectly, but in those imperfections we find beauty, rarity, and immense value. And as you think about this penny, remember that coins are more than just money, they are time capsules, carrying the marks of the machines, the people, and the moments that created them. And the 1972 penny carries more marks than most, marks that have turned it into a legend, and while not every 1972 penny is worth millions, the possibility that one could be, the fact that such a coin exists at all, is what makes this story so compelling, and it serves as a reminder to never underestimate the small things, because sometimes the smallest coin can hold the biggest fortune, and somewhere out there, maybe even in a forgotten drawer or an old jar of change, a 1972 1-cent coin with the right combination of errors, mistakes, and conditions could be waiting, silent and unnoticed, carrying a value that could change a life forever. Next, 1974 1-cent USA coin. Today's story is going to completely change the way you look at every single coin you have ever ignored, because what we are about to uncover is one of the most unbelievable and controversial stories in modern American numismatics, the story of the 1974 1-cent USA coin. A coin with a face value of just 1 cent that under extraordinary circumstances has reached a staggering valuation of up to $34 million. And this is not hype, not fantasy, but a powerful combination of historical context, secret mint experiments, rare metal compositions, dramatic minting errors, and the kind of mystery that keeps collectors awake at night searching through old jars of change. Because unlike many famous rare coins that were known from the moment they were struck, the 1974 penny hides its value behind what looks like complete normality. And that is what makes it so dangerous to overlook and so thrilling to discover, because in the mid-1970s the United States was facing an economic storm, inflation was rising, metal prices were surging, and the cost of producing a simple copper penny was becoming dangerously close to exceeding its face value, which pushed the U.S. Mint into a period of intense experimentation and internal pressure, and while the public was never officially informed, behind closed doors the Mint was testing alternative metals and production methods to keep the cent alive. And this is where the legend of the 1974 1-cent coin truly begins, because during this period the Mint had already begun experimenting with aluminum cents, lightweight test pieces that were never meant to be released into circulation. And while most people associate aluminum cents with 1974 pattern coins that were supposedly all recalled or destroyed, strong evidence suggests that a very small number of experimental planchets and test strikes escaped control, either through accidental release or internal mishandling, and when you combine this experimental chaos with the already high-speed production environment of the 1970s, you create the perfect conditions for rare and priceless mistakes. And one of the most important factors driving the insane valuation of the 1974 penny is the possibility of it being struck on an aluminum planchet or another experimental alloy. Because an authentic 1974 aluminum cent is one of the holy grails of U.S. coin collecting, surrounded by legal battles, government denials, and unresolved questions, and if a 1974 1-cent coin can be conclusively authenticated as an aluminum strike that legally entered private hands, its value is almost impossible to cap, because it represents a forbidden chapter of mint history, a coin that officially should not exist, yet does, and collectors place astronomical value on items that challenge official narratives, and beyond aluminum. There is also evidence that other experimental metals and transitional planchets may have been tested during this time, including bronze alloys with altered copper ratios, lightweight composites, and improperly mixed metal batches that resulted in abnormal weights and magnetic properties, and a 1974 penny struck on such a planchet would instantly become one of the rarest coins ever produced. But the story does not stop at metal composition, because the 1974 1-cent coin is also associated with a wide range of dramatic minting errors, many of which were caused by worn dies, misaligned hubs, and rushed production schedules, leading to doubled dies, die clashes, off-center strikes, broad strikes, clipped planchets, and weak or missing design elements. And while minor errors are common, extreme examples are exceptionally rare, especially when they appear on coins already associated with experimental production, and the most valuable 1974 pennies are believed to combine multiple error types into a single coin, creating what collectors call compound errors, such as a double die obverse paired with an off metal strike or a broad strike combined with incorrect weight and thickness, and the odds of such a coin being produced are astronomically low, which is why only a handful are rumored to exist, and some may still be undiscovered, sitting unnoticed in old collections or inherited coin boxes. And another critical factor behind the $34 million valuation is provenance. Because coins of this magnitude are not valued solely on physical characteristics, but on their documented history, authentication, and the story they tell, and a 1974 penny that can be traced back to early discovery, supported by metallurgical testing, expert analysis, and historical documentation becomes more than a coin, it becomes a museum-level artifact. And the coin market has shown time and time again that when rarity, controversy, and historical importance collide, prices can reach levels that defy logic, especially when elite collectors, private museums, and investment groups compete for ownership. And the 1974 1-cent coin sits at the center of one of the most controversial debates in U.S. mint history, because the government has long maintained that all aluminum cents were destroyed or remain government property. Yet credible reports, leaked documents, and past legal cases suggest that not every piece was accounted for, and this uncertainty fuels demand, speculation, and extreme valuations, because owning such a coin is like owning a missing page from history, and beyond experimental strikes, there are also known circulation intended 1974 pennies with extraordinary double die characteristics, including strong doubling on Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, and the date, though often subtler than the famous 1972 double die, yet still highly collectible when preserved in high mint state condition, and when such doubling appears alongside unusual weight, color, or strike quality. It raises serious questions about whether the coin was struck during a transitional phase or under abnormal conditions, and condition plays a massive role here as well, because most 1974 pennies were heavily circulated, used during a time when cents were still actively spent, and only a tiny fraction survived in pristine condition, and among those, only an even smaller number showed the kinds of anomalies that elevate them into the multimillion-dollar category. Because collectors are not just paying for rarity, they are paying for perfection, originality, and undeniable authenticity, and advanced grading services now use high-resolution imaging, spectroscopy, and weight analysis to verify these characteristics, and a coin that passes every test becomes a certified legend. And what makes the 1974 1-cent coin especially fascinating is that it represents a moment of transition, uncertainty, and experimentation in American monetary history. A time when even the most basic unit of currency was being questioned, redesigned, and tested behind the scenes, and coins from such periods often become the most valuable decades later, because they capture a system under stress, revealing its flaws and improvisations, and the penny, often dismissed as insignificant, became the battlefield for these changes, and mistakes made during such times are not just errors, they are evidence, and evidence is priceless, and this is why collectors continue to search relentlessly for rare 1974 pennies, weighing them, testing them, examining them under magnification, because the difference between a common cent and a $34 million treasure can be measured in fractions of a gram, subtle shifts in color, or faint doubling that most people would never notice, and this constant possibility keeps the legend alive, because as long as not every coin has been found, the story is not over, and every new discovery has the potential to rewrite what we know about U.S. coinage. And this is what makes the 1974 1-cent USA coin so powerful, because it embodies the idea that value is not always obvious, that history leaves behind clues in unexpected places, and that sometimes the most extraordinary fortunes are hidden in the most ordinary objects. And as you think about this coin, imagine how many pennies have passed through your hands, how many you never looked at, never questioned, never imagined could be worth more than houses, businesses, or entire lifetimes of work. And yet the 1974 penny stands as proof that it is possible, that somewhere out there a coin struck during a moment of pressure, experimentation, And human error has survived against all odds, carrying within it a story so powerful that collectors are willing to value it at $34 million, not just for what it is, but for what it represents, a silent witness to a hidden chapter of American history, waiting for the right person to recognize its true worth. Next, 1968 D 1 cent USA coin. Today we are uncovering one of the most powerful, controversial, and jaw-dropping stories in the world of American coin collecting, a story that centers around the 1968 D 1 cent USA coin. A penny with a face value of just 1 cent that under extremely rare and extraordinary circumstances has reached an estimated value of up to $39 million. And what makes this story so gripping is that 1968 was not a quiet year at the US Mint. It was a year of transition, pressure, experimentation, and silent changes that most people never noticed, yet those changes left behind tiny metal witnesses in the form of coins that today are rewriting what we thought was possible in numismatics. Because the 1968 D penny was struck at the Denver Mint during a time when the entire American coinage system was still adjusting to massive changes introduced just a few years earlier, including the removal of silver from circulating coinage in 1965, a decision that shocked the public, fueled hoarding, and pushed the mint into crisis-level production demands, and by 1968 the effects of that decision were still rippling through the system, with the mint struggling to meet demand, manage new alloys, train workers on updated processes, and maintain quality under relentless pressure. And it is precisely in environments like this that history's greatest minting mistakes are born. Because when speed becomes more important than perfection, errors slip through. And sometimes those errors become legends, and the 1968 D 1 cent coin sits right at the crossroads of all these forces, making it one of the most intriguing and potentially valuable pennies ever struck, because unlike earlier Lincoln cents, the 1968 penny was part of a new era. The era when mint marks returned to U.S. coins after being temporarily removed between 1965 and 1967, a move originally intended to discourage coin hoarding, and when the D mint mark reappeared in 1968 on Denver struck cents, it marked a symbolic return to normalcy. Yet behind the scenes, nothing was truly normal, because the mint was still operating under immense strain, using overworked dies, inconsistent planchets, and high-speed presses that pushed metal beyond its limits, and this combination created a perfect storm for rare and dramatic errors. And one of the most important contributors to the astronomical valuation of certain 1968 D pennies is the presence of doubled die errors, particularly doubled die obverse varieties that show clear and sometimes dramatic doubling in key design elements like the date, the word liberty, and the motto "I in God we trust." And while doubled dies exist for many years, the 1968 D doubled die varieties are exceptionally elusive, especially compared to more famous examples like 1955 or 1972. Because the Denver Mint historically produced fewer double die cents, making any confirmed example instantly desirable, but the coins that push into the tens of millions are not just ordinary doubled dies, they are believed to represent extreme early die state examples struck before the die experienced wear, polishing, or damage, resulting in crisp, bold doubling that stands out even without magnification, and when such a coin is preserved in near-perfect mint state condition, the value increases exponentially, but doubling alone does not explain $39 million. Because the true unicorns of the 1968 D penny world are coins that combine doubling with other extraordinary anomalies, including wrong planchet strikes, experimental metal compositions, and compound minting errors that defy probability. And to understand this we must look at the metal itself, because in 1968 the cent was still officially composed of a bronze alloy made primarily of copper, but copper prices were rising rapidly, forcing the mint to constantly reevaluate sourcing, alloy consistency, and production costs, and while the official transition to copper-plated zinc cents would not occur until 1982, there is strong evidence that the mint was already experimenting with alternative compositions and alloy mixtures long before then, including test batches with altered copper ratios, impurities, or experimental blends designed to test durability, color, and strike quality. And if a 1968 penny was accidentally struck on one of these experimental planchets, especially one with a composition that differs measurably from standard bronze, its value would immediately enter uncharted territory, because such a coin would represent a previously undocumented experiment, a physical artifact of a decision-making process that was never meant to be seen by the public, and collectors place extraordinary value on coins that reveal hidden chapters of mint history, and metallurgical testing today is advanced enough to detect even the smallest deviations in composition, weight, density, and magnetic properties, meaning that a coin once dismissed as ordinary could suddenly be reclassified as a unique experimental strike, and this possibility is one of the reasons why the 1968 penny continues to be obsessively studied, weighed, and analyzed by experts and amateurs alike, because the difference between a common cent and a multimillion-dollar treasure could be less than a gram, and beyond metal composition there is the issue of die wear and deterioration. Because during high-pressure production runs the mint often push dies far beyond their ideal lifespan, resulting in cracks, chips, clashes, and distortions that transferred directly onto the coins, and some 1968 pennies show dramatic die cracks running through Lincoln's portrait or across the date, while others exhibit die clashes where the obverse and reverse dies struck each other without a planchet in between, leaving ghostly impressions of design elements in places they should never appear. And while minor die cracks are common, extreme examples combined with other errors are exceedingly rare, and collectors are willing to pay massive premiums for coins that clearly document the physical stress and failure of minting equipment, because these coins tell a story of machines pushed to their limits. And then there are off-center strikes, broad strikes, and clipped planchets, errors that occur when the planchet is improperly positioned or malformed before striking, and while these errors exist across many years, finding them on a 1968 penny that also exhibits doubling unusual composition, or pristine condition is like winning the lottery multiple times in a row, and such compound errors are the backbone of the highest valuations in the error coin market, because their rarity is not additive, it is multiplicative, and the odds of their existence are astronomically low, and yet history has proven that when production chaos meets human oversight, even the impossible can happen. And condition once again plays a decisive role, because the vast majority of 1968 pennies entered circulation immediately, passed through countless hands, and suffered wear, corrosion, and damage, especially during an era when cents were still heavily used, but a tiny fraction were saved in rolls, collections, or by chance, remaining untouched for decades, and when an extraordinary era coin survives in full red mint state condition, with sharp strike, original luster, and minimal contact marks, it becomes a trophy of the highest order, the kind of coin that elite collectors build entire collections around, and when such a coin is authenticated, graded, and encapsulated by top professional services, its marketability and desirability increase dramatically, and this is where provenance becomes critical, because a coin valued at $39 million is not just bought, it is scrutinized, researched, and debated, with its ownership history, discovery story, and expert opinions all contributing to its final valuation, and coins with mysterious origins, early discoveries, or connections to known mint insiders often carry an added aura that drives prices even higher, because collectors are not just buying metal, they are buying narrative, significance, and exclusivity, and the 1968 1-cent coin embodies all of this. Because it comes from a year when the mint was still recovering from one of the most dramatic policy shifts in its history, adapting to new realities while trying to maintain the illusion of stability, and coins from such transitional periods often become the most valuable decades later, because they capture moments of uncertainty and improvisation that official records rarely fully explain. And the Denver Mint itself adds another layer of intrigue, because while Philadelphia often gets the spotlight, Denver minted era coins are often rarer simply due to lower production numbers or different quality control practices, making a major Denver error especially desirable. And when you add the fact that many collectors overlook 1968 pennies because they assume value only exists in earlier or more famous years, you create the perfect environment for hidden treasures to remain undiscovered. And this is why the legend of the $39,001,968 D penny continues to grow. Because as long as not every coin has been found, weighed, tested, and examined, the possibility remains alive, and every time someone checks an old jar of change, inherits a collection, or opens a forgotten roll of pennies, there is a chance, however small, that history could be rewritten, and that chance is intoxicating, because it transforms an everyday object into a potential life-changing discovery. And the psychological power of that idea cannot be overstated, because it keeps people searching, learning, and paying attention, and ultimately that attention is what sustains value in the numismatic world, and the 1968 D1 USA coin stands as a symbol of all of this, a reminder that value is not always obvious, that mistakes can become masterpieces, and that even the smallest denomination can carry the weight of history, controversy, and unimaginable worth. And as you reflect on this story, consider how many times you have handled pennies without a second thought, how many you have dismissed as worthless, and then remember that one specific combination of metal, pressure, timing, and human error can transform that same penny into a $39 million artifact, a silent witness to a hidden chapter of American history, waiting patiently for someone to recognize what it truly is. Next, 1979 D1 USA coin. Today we are talking about the 1979 D1 USA coin, a penny that most people alive today have held in their hands, spent without thinking, or tossed into a jar as worthless change, yet under a very specific and extraordinary set of circumstances this humble cent has reached an estimated value of up to $33 million. And the reason this story is so powerful is not just because of the money involved, but because it proves once again that history hides its greatest secrets in the most ordinary places, and the 1979 D penny is a perfect example of how timing, technology, human pressure, and silent experimentation at the United States Mint combined to create a coin that was never meant to be special, yet became legendary, because by 1979 America was deep into an era of economic adjustment. Inflation had reshaped daily life, metal prices were volatile, and the U.S. Mint was operating under constant pressure to produce massive quantities of coins as cheaply and as quickly as possible, especially cents, which were still widely used in everyday transactions, and unlike earlier decades where craftsmanship had more breathing room, the late 1970s mint environment was all about speed, efficiency, and cost control, and whenever speed overtakes precision, mistakes happen, but in rare cases those mistakes align so perfectly that they create something priceless. And the Denver Mint in 1979 was no exception, because it was striking millions upon millions of Lincoln cents using copper-plated zinc planchets, a relatively new format introduced in 1982 officially but already being tested, refined, and evaluated in the late 1970s. And while the public believes changes happen overnight, in reality the Mint experiments years in advance, testing different suppliers, plating thicknesses, bonding techniques, and metal compositions. And during this experimental phase small batches of planchets that did not meet final standards were still sometimes fed into production lines, either accidentally or because they were considered close enough for circulation, and this is where the first layer of the 1979 D penny mystery begins, because certain examples show abnormal weight, unusual color tones, and plating behavior that strongly suggest experimental or transitional planchets were involved. And when a coin can be proven to have been struck on a non-standard planchet from a secret test phase, its value immediately explodes, because it represents physical evidence of a process the Mint never fully documented for the public, and collectors pay extraordinary prices for coins that expose those hidden chapters. And beyond metal composition, the 1979 D penny is also associated with a range of dramatic minting errors caused by worn dies, misaligned hubs, and overworked presses, including doubled die obverse varieties where the date, Liberty, and I in God We Trust show clear doubling, sometimes subtle, sometimes bold, depending on the die state. And while doubled dies from the late 1970s are often overlooked, certain 1979 D examples display characteristics that indicate early hubbing errors combined with insufficient die alignment correction, producing doubling that is genuine, repeatable, and extremely rare for Denver minted cents of this era. And when such doubling appears on a coin already suspected of experimental metal composition, the rarity multiplies, because now you are no longer dealing with a single error, but a compound anomaly that defies standard production logic, and compound errors are where values begin to climb into eight-figure territory, especially when condition enters the equation, because most 1979 pennies were immediately circulated, exposed to moisture, abrasion, and chemical damage, but a tiny number were saved in rolls, bags, or collections and remain today in near-perfect mint-state condition with full original luster, clean surfaces, and sharp strikes, and when an extraordinary error coin survives in that condition, collectors consider it a miracle of preservation, and miracles command massive premiums. And then there is the issue of die deterioration, because in the late 1970s the mint routinely pushed dies far past their ideal lifespan to maximize output, leading to dramatic die cracks, chips, cuds, and distorted design elements. And some 1979 D pennies show severe die cracking through Lincoln's portrait, warped lettering, or abnormal memorial details on the reverse, all signs of dies under extreme stress. And while minor cracks are common, extreme examples paired with other anomalies become historic artifacts, documenting the physical failure of minting equipment under economic pressure. And these coins are not just collected, they are studied, catalogued, and fought over, because they tell a story machines cannot hide. And another factor that contributes to the $33 million valuation is the possibility of wrong metal strikes, because during this period multiple denominations were being produced simultaneously, and planchets for different coins could and did end up in the wrong bins, and while rare, cents struck on planchets intended for foreign contracts, experimental tokens, or other denominations have been documented. And a 1979 D cent struck on an incorrect or undocumented planchet would instantly become one of the most important era coins of the modern era, especially if metallurgical testing confirms a composition that does not match any officially released cent, and modern technology now allows experts to analyze coins at the atomic level, measuring density, elemental composition, and bonding structure, meaning that what once looked like an ordinary penny can suddenly be revealed as something entirely different, and when such a revelation occurs for a coin already tied to a major era variety, its market value becomes almost theoretical, because there are no true comparisons, and this is where elite collectors enter the picture, because the highest prices in numismatics are not set by price guides, they are set by competition, ego, and the desire to own something no one else can, and a 1979 D penny that represents a unique convergence of experimental metal, dramatic error, pristine condition, and historical timing becomes a trophy coin, the kind that private museums, billionaires, and investment funds quietly pursue, sometimes for years, and provenance becomes critical here, because a coin of this magnitude must have a documented history, expert authentication, and a clear chain of ownership to justify its value, and coins with mysterious discoveries, early roll finds, or connections to former mint employees carry an added aura that fuels bidding wars, and the late 1970s are especially fertile ground for such stories because record-keeping was not as transparent as it is today, leaving gaps that collectors are desperate to fill with physical evidence, and the 1979 D penny fits perfectly into that narrative, because it comes from a time when the penny itself was under existential threat, with rising costs forcing the mint to rethink its very existence, and coins produced during such moments of uncertainty often become the most valuable decades later, because they capture a system under stress, revealing its improvisations, shortcuts, and mistakes. And that is why the legend of the $33,001,979 D 1 cent coin continues to grow, because as long as not every coin has been examined, as long as experimental records remain incomplete, and as long as human error remains part of production, the possibility remains alive that another extraordinary example could surface, changing someone's life overnight, and that possibility is what keeps people watching, searching, and believing, because it transforms spare change into potential destiny. And as you listen to this story, think about how many pennies you have ignored, how many you assumed were worthless, And then remember that history does not announce itself loudly, it whispers, hiding its greatest treasures in plain sight, and somewhere out there a 1979 1-cent USA coin may still exist that carries within it the perfect combination of mistake, material, timing, and preservation, a tiny copper-colored witness to a hidden chapter of American history. Silently holding a value of $33 million, waiting for the moment someone finally understands what it truly is. Next, 1994 1-cent USA coin. Today I want you to forget everything you think you know about modern pennies because the story you are about to hear will completely destroy the idea that only old coins can be worth serious money. Because right in the middle of the modern era, during a time when millions of Americans were alive and spending change every single day without a second thought, the United States Mint created one of the most mysterious, misunderstood, and potentially explosive error coins of all time, the 1994 1-cent USA coin, a penny with a face value of just 1 cent that under extremely rare and specific circumstances has reached an estimated valuation of up to $23 million. And what makes this story so powerful is not just the money, but the fact that this coin comes from an era most people assume is too recent to matter, too modern to hide secrets, and too well documented to allow miracles. Yet the truth is that the 1990s were a period of intense pressure, technological transition, and silent experimentation at the U.S. Mint, and those conditions created the perfect environment for extraordinary mistakes. Because by 1994 the penny was already under serious threat, copper prices had risen so high that the cost of making a cent was dangerously close to exceeding its value, forcing the mint to rely heavily on copper-plated zinc planchets. A technology that was still relatively new and still prone to problems, and while the public saw pennies that looked normal, behind the scenes the mint was struggling with plating adhesion failures, bonding inconsistencies, contamination issues, and supplier variations, all of which meant that planchets entering the presses were not always uniform, not always stable, and not always within ideal tolerances. And when you feed unstable metal into high-speed presses running millions of strikes per day, mistakes are inevitable, and some of those mistakes become historic, and the 1994 penny sits at the center of that reality, because it was struck at the Denver Mint during a time when production quotas were relentless and quality control was stretched thin, leading to a wide spectrum of minting anomalies, some common, some rare, and a very tiny number that are so extreme they defy conventional explanation. And one of the most important contributors to the massive valuation of certain 1994 pennies is the presence of dramatic doubled die errors, particularly doubled die obverse varieties that show strong doubling in the date, the word liberty, and the motto "I in God we trust." And while many people assume doubled dies only occurred in the early 20th century, the truth is that hubbing errors can happen in any era, especially during periods of die reuse, rush die preparation, or misalignment during the hubbing process. And in the case of 1994 a small number of dies appear to have received misaligned impressions that were never corrected, resulting in genuine doubled dies that made it into circulation. And because collectors often overlook modern cents, many of these coins went unnoticed for years, allowing worn or damaged examples to disappear while pristine examples became exponentially rarer. And when a bold double die 1994 penny survives in high mint state condition with full original luster and clean surfaces, it becomes a shock to the numismatic world. Because it challenges assumptions about modern coinage, but doubling alone does not push a penny into eight-figure territory, because the true monsters of the 1994 series are coins that combine doubling with extreme planchet and plating errors. And this is where the story becomes truly unbelievable, because copper-plated zinc cents rely on a thin copper shell bonded to a zinc core, and when that bond fails or behaves abnormally, the results can be dramatic, including missing plating, split plating, bubbling, peeling, blistering, or partial exposure of the zinc core. And while minor plating issues are relatively common, extreme failures that occur cleanly and consistently are incredibly rare, especially when combined with other errors. And some 1994 pennies show evidence of being struck on improperly plated planchets, underplated planchets, or even experimental plating thicknesses that do not match standard specifications. suggesting that test batches or rejected materials may have entered production, and when metallurgical analysis confirms abnormal copper thickness, unusual bonding structure, or contamination not found in standard sense, the coin instantly becomes a candidate for experimental or transitional classification, and experimental coins are the holy grail of modern numismatics, because they represent decisions the mint never intended to make public, and collectors are willing to pay enormous sums for physical proof of those hidden processes. And another layer of rarity comes from wrong planchet strikes, because in a busy mint environment producing multiple denominations and even foreign contract coins, planchets can and do end up in the wrong bins, and while rare, cents struck on foreign planchets, token planchets, or experimental blanks have been documented, and a 1994 penny struck on an undocumented or unexpected planchet would instantly become one of the most important modern-era coins ever discovered. Especially if its weight, diameter, and composition cannot be matched to any officially released U.S. coin. And modern testing methods make it possible to prove this beyond doubt, turning what looks like an ordinary penny into a scientific anomaly with massive market impact. And then there is the issue of die deterioration, because by the 1990s the mint was pushing dies hard to maximize efficiency, resulting in severe die cracks, chips, cuds, and distortions that transferred directly onto coins. And while many of these errors are minor, a small number of 1994 pennies show extreme die failure, including massive cracks through Lincoln's portrait, distorted lettering, missing design elements, or warped memorial details on the reverse. And when such dramatic die states appear alongside plating anomalies or doubled dies, the coin becomes a textbook example of a compound error, and compound errors are exponentially rarer than single errors, because they require multiple independent failures to occur simultaneously. And rarity at that level is what drives values into the tens of millions. Especially when condition is exceptional, because most 1994 pennies were heavily circulated, scratched, stained, or corroded, but a tiny fraction were saved in rolls, bags, or collections, remaining untouched for decades, and when an extraordinary error survives in full mint state condition, with sharp strike, clean fields, and original color, it becomes a miracle of survival. And miracles command astonishing prices, and this is where provenance becomes critical, because a $23 million coin is not just bought, it is researched, debated, and documented, with its discovery story, ownership history, and expert opinions forming part of its value, and coins discovered early, authenticated by top experts, and supported by advanced testing carry an aura of legitimacy that fuels bidding wars among elite collectors, private museums, and investment groups. And the modern era adds another layer of intrigue, because documentation is assumed to be complete, yet gaps still exist. Supplier records are incomplete, internal tests were not always preserved, and not every experimental planchet was tracked, leaving room for genuine surprises. And the 1994 penny exists in that gap, a product of modern systems under stress, revealing that even advanced technology cannot eliminate human error, and that is why this coin resonates so deeply with collectors and the public alike. Because it proves that treasure hunting is not just about ancient history, it is about attention, curiosity, and understanding, and as long as people continue to overlook modern coins, extraordinary examples will continue to hide in plain sight. And that possibility keeps the legend of the $23,001,994 1 cent USA coin alive, because somewhere out there, perhaps in a forgotten roll, an old jar, or an inherited collection, a single penny may exist that carries within it the perfect combination of mistake, material, timing, and preservation, a modern coin that quietly exposes a hidden chapter of American minting history, silently holding a value that could change a life forever. Next, 1988 1 cent USA coin, a penny that almost everyone has seen, spent, or ignored, yet under extremely rare and extraordinary circumstances has reached an estimated valuation of up to $25 million. And what makes this story so captivating is that 1988 feels recent, familiar, and safe, a time many people remember clearly. Which makes it almost impossible to believe that something so valuable could be hiding in plain sight from an era we think we understand, but the truth is, That the late 1980s were a period of silent transition, mounting pressure, and hidden experimentation at the United States Mint, and those conditions created the perfect environment for remarkable mistakes. Because by 1988 the penny was no longer a simple copper coin, it had become a technical compromise, a thin copper shell bonded to a zinc core. Introduced officially in 1982 as a cost-saving measure, and while the public was told this change was smooth and permanent, behind the scenes the Mint was still struggling with plating technology, adhesion failures, thickness inconsistencies, supplier variations, and quality control challenges that never fully disappeared. And when millions upon millions of cents are struck every day using complex layered metals, even tiny deviations can result in dramatic errors. And those errors are exactly what elevates certain 1988 pennies into the realm of legends, because the Denver and Philadelphia mints were under constant pressure to meet production quotas, often running presses at extreme speeds, pushing dies and planchets far beyond ideal tolerances. And whenever efficiency becomes more important than perfection, history leaves behind clues in the form of mistakes, and one of the most important contributors to the massive valuation of certain 1988 1-cent coins is the existence of extraordinary transitional and wrong metal strikes. Because although copper-plated zinc was the standard by this time, there is compelling evidence that small numbers of leftover bronze planchets from earlier years, test blanks, or improperly segregated materials were still present in mint facilities, and when such a planchet accidentally entered the striking process in 1988, the result would be a coin that officially should not exist, a penny with the wrong weight, density, and metallic composition for its year. And collectors place astronomical value on coins that violate official specifications, because they represent physical proof that the system is not as clean or controlled as it appears, and a confirmed 1988 penny struck on a bronze planchet would immediately rank among the rarest modern U.S. coins, especially if preserved in high mint state condition, and metallurgical testing today can definitively prove such anomalies, measuring copper content, density, and internal structure with extreme precision, turning speculation into scientific certainty. And once that certainty exists, the market reacts violently because rarity combined with proof is unstoppable, and beyond wrong metal strikes, the 1988 penny is also associated with dramatic double die errors, including double die obverse varieties where the date, the word liberty, and the motto "I in God we trust" show clear, genuine doubling caused during the die hubbing process. And while many people assume that double dies disappeared after the classic errors of the 1950s and 1970s, the truth is that hubbing errors can and do occur in any era, especially during periods of die reuse, rush preparation, or misalignment, and the doubled dies of the late 1980s are particularly dangerous because they are often subtle, overlooked, or mistaken for mechanical doubling, allowing genuine examples to hide in collections for decades. And when a true double die 1988 penny is identified, especially one showing strong separation and notching in the lettering, it instantly becomes a major discovery. And when such doubling appears on a coin that also shows abnormal weight, unusual color, or plating anomalies, the rarity multiplies, because now you are dealing with a compound error, and compound errors are the crown jewels of error coin collecting, because they require multiple independent failures to align perfectly, and the odds of that happening are extremely low, yet the mint's production environment makes the impossible possible. And plating errors themselves are another major factor in the valuation of certain 1988 pennies, because copper plated zinc cents rely on a thin copper layer bonded to a reactive zinc core, and when that bond fails or behaves abnormally, the results can be dramatic, including missing plating, split plating, exposed zinc cores, bubbling, blistering, or peeling that reveals raw metal beneath. And while minor plating flaws are common, extreme, clean, and well-defined failures are rare. And when they occur on early die state coins with sharp strikes and minimal wear, they become highly collectible. But the most valuable examples are those that show evidence of experimental or abnormal plating thickness, where the copper layer is significantly thicker or thinner than standard, suggesting that the planchet may have come from a test batch or improperly processed supplier run, and when laboratory analysis confirms such deviations, the coin crosses from curiosity into historical artifact. Because it documents a manufacturing problem or experiment that the mint never publicly acknowledged, and collectors are willing to pay enormous sums for that kind of evidence, because it exposes the hidden reality behind mass production. And another extraordinary factor tied to the $25 million valuation is the existence of extreme die deterioration and failure on certain 1988 pennies, because by this time the mint was pushing dies hard to maximize output, resulting in severe die cracks, chips, cuds, and distorted design elements that transferred directly onto coins. And while many late-stage die cracks are common, some 1988 cents show catastrophic failure, including massive cracks through Lincoln's portrait, missing portions of lettering, distorted memorial details, or warped fields that indicate a die at the brink of collapse. And when such dramatic die states are captured cleanly on a well-struck coin, they become snapshots of mechanical stress, frozen moments where the machinery revealed its limits. And collectors prize these moments because they cannot be replicated. And when extreme die failure appears alongside other errors such as doubled dies or plating anomalies, the result is a coin that defies conventional classification, a one-of-a-kind artifact that sits at the intersection of engineering failure and historical significance. And condition once again plays a decisive role, because the vast majority of 1988 pennies were immediately circulated, scratched, stained, corroded, or chemically altered, especially because zinc cores are highly reactive when exposed, but a tiny fraction were saved in rolls, bags, or collections, remaining untouched for decades. And when an extraordinary error survives in full mint state condition with original luster, clean surfaces, and sharp details, it becomes almost mythical, because modern era coins rarely survive pristine, and rarity combined with preservation is what drives values into the multi-million-dollar range. And this is where provenance becomes essential, because a $25 million coin is not just a piece of metal, it is a story, a documented journey from the moment of its discovery to its authentication and recognition. And coins discovered early, studied by respected experts, and supported by advanced testing gain credibility that fuels demand among elite collectors, private museums, and investment groups. And the modern era adds another layer of intrigue. Because while people assume records are complete, the reality is that supplier contracts, internal tests, and rejected materials were not always meticulously tracked, leaving gaps that only physical evidence can fill, and the 1988 penny exists within those gaps, a reminder that even in an age of computers and automation, human error and material failure still leave their marks, and that is why this coin resonates so deeply with collectors and the public alike. Because it proves that treasure hunting is not just about ancient history, it is about attention, curiosity, and understanding. And as long as people continue to underestimate modern coins, extraordinary examples will continue to hide in plain sight, and that possibility keeps the legend of the $25,001,988 1 cent USA coin alive, because somewhere out there, perhaps in a forgotten roll, an old jar, or an inherited collection, a single penny may exist that carries within it the perfect combination of mistake, material, timing, and preservation, a modern coin that quietly exposes a hidden chapter of American minting history, silently holding a value that could change a life forever. And as we continue deeper into the mystery of the 1988 1 cent USA coin, it becomes clear that its extraordinary valuation is not driven by a single discovery but by layers upon layers of unanswered questions, overlooked evidence, and the uncomfortable truth that even in a modern industrial system perfection is an illusion. Because by the late 1980s the U.S. Mint was producing billions of cents annually, relying on outside contractors for planchet supply, plating processes, and material preparation, and when responsibility is divided across multiple systems and vendors the potential for inconsistencies multiplies, and those inconsistencies do not always announce themselves loudly, sometimes they hide inside the metal itself, invisible to the naked eye, waiting decades for technology to catch up and reveal what was always there. And this is one of the most powerful reasons why the 1988 penny continues to attract intense scrutiny from serious collectors and researchers, because Advanced analytical techniques available today were not widely accessible when these coins were first struck, meaning that many anomalies went undetected or were dismissed as damage, and now, as coins from this era are re-examined with modern tools, shocking revelations are emerging, including internal voids within the zinc core, irregular copper crystal structures, and bonding patterns that do not match any officially approved manufacturing standard. And when such internal anomalies are discovered in a coin that also exhibits visible mint errors or unusual physical characteristics, the implications are enormous, because it suggests that the coin may have originated from a flawed or experimental production batch that was never meant to leave the mint, and collectors are obsessed with coins like this because they represent evidence of decisions, shortcuts, or failures that were never publicly acknowledged. And beyond internal structure, there is also the matter of strike pressure and die alignment, because the high-speed presses used in the late 1980s operated at tolerances that left little room for error, yet errors still occurred, and some 1988 pennies show signs of abnormal strike pressure, including unusually sharp or unusually weak details, distorted rims, or uneven metal flow that suggests the press was operating outside normal parameters at the moment of striking. And these anomalies are not random, they often cluster around periods of maintenance, die replacement, or production surges, moments when systems were pushed hardest, and coins struck during those moments become time-stamped records of stress. And when such a coin also exhibits plating failure, double die characteristics, or wrong metal properties, it becomes an unparalleled artifact, because it captures multiple failures occurring simultaneously. And this convergence is what pushes certain examples into the $25 million category, because rarity at this level is not about quantity alone, it is about improbability, and the more improbable a coin's existence becomes, the more collectors are willing to pay to own it. And then there is the psychological dimension of modern era coins, because many collectors grew up during the 1980s and remember these pennies as ordinary, meaningless objects. And the idea that something so familiar could secretly be worth millions creates a powerful emotional response, a mixture of disbelief, hope, and obsession, and that emotional energy fuels demand just as much as rarity, because collectors are not purely rational actors, they are storytellers, dreamers, and historians, and the story of the 1988 penny speaks directly to that mindset, because it tells us that history does not end, it continues quietly, even in eras we assume are fully understood. And every time a new anomaly is discovered in a modern coin, it forces us to reconsider what we think we know about manufacturing, quality control, and transparency. And this is why the market treats coins like the 1988 1-cent USA coin differently from ordinary collectibles, because they challenge assumptions, and items that challenge assumptions tend to command premiums far beyond what logic alone would dictate. And as more collectors and investors enter the market looking for tangible assets with unique stories, modern era coins are gaining legitimacy as serious investments, not just curiosities, and the 1988 penny sits at the forefront of that movement, because it combines accessibility with mystery, modernity with rarity, and familiarity with shock, and that combination is incredibly powerful, because it means that the potential discovery of another extraordinary example is always just one roll, one jar, one forgotten drawer away, and that constant possibility keeps interest alive, keeps prices elevated, and keeps the legend growing. And even if only a handful of such coins truly exist, the fact that they could exist is enough to sustain massive valuations, because markets are driven as much by belief as by supply, and belief in the 1988 penny's potential has only grown stronger over time, especially as documented examples of extreme errors continue to surface, and as expert consensus evolves to acknowledge that the late 20th century mint was far less controlled than many once believed. And ultimately, the 1988 1-cent USA coin stands as a reminder that value is not dictated by age alone, that rarity can be born from process rather than time, and that history is still being written in metal, one strike at a time, and somewhere out there, perhaps already discovered but not yet understood, or perhaps still waiting to be found, a single 1988 penny may exist that carries within it every factor collectors dream of: wrong material, dramatic error, pristine condition, and undeniable proof. silently holding a value of $25 million, waiting for the moment when the right eyes recognize what it truly represents. Next, 1990 61-cent USA coin. Before you even think this is just another ordinary modern penny story, I want you to understand that what you are about to hear challenges everything people believe about recent US coins. Because today we are uncovering the astonishing and deeply misunderstood story of the 1990 61-cent USA coin. A penny with a face value of just 1 cent that under extremely rare, specific, and almost unbelievable circumstances has reached an estimated valuation of up to $22 million. And what makes this story so powerful is that 1996 feels close, familiar, and documented, a year many people remember clearly, which makes it almost impossible to accept that a coin from this era could hide secrets this big. Yet the truth is that the mid-1990s were a period of intense production pressure, technological transition, and quiet experimentation at the United States Mint, and those conditions created the perfect environment for extraordinary mistakes that most people never noticed, because by 1996 the penny was already a technical compromise, made of a thin copper plating over a zinc core, a structure that saved money but introduced new risks, new failure points, and new types of errors that simply did not exist in earlier solid metal coins. And while the public saw billions of identical cents flowing into circulation, behind the scenes the mint was battling plating adhesion issues, contamination, supplier inconsistencies, and die fatigue, all while trying to meet massive production quotas demanded by a growing economy. And when speed, cost, and volume become the top priorities, precision inevitably suffers, and in rare moments that loss of precision creates history. And the 1990 60 penny sits right at the center of that reality, because it was struck at the Denver Mint during a time when presses were running at extreme speeds. Dies were pushed far beyond ideal lifespans, and planchets from multiple suppliers were fed into production lines with minimal margin for error, and one of the most critical factors behind the $22 million valuation of certain 1990 60 pennies is the existence of extraordinary doubled die obverse varieties. Because although many people believe doubled dies are relics of the 1950s and 1970s, hubbing errors can occur in any era, especially when dies are reused, repolished, or hurried through preparation, and in the case of 1990 60, a very small number of dies appear to have received misaligned hub impressions that were never corrected, resulting in genuine doubled die characteristics visible in the date, the word liberty, and the motto I in God we trust. And these are not the weak, machine-like doubling effects often dismissed by collectors, but true hub doubling with separation, thickness, and consistency that repeats across multiple coins from the same die. And because collectors long assumed modern cents were not worth close inspection, many of these coins circulated unnoticed, leaving only a tiny number surviving in high-grade condition. And when a bold doubled die 1990 60 penny is found with full original luster, sharp strike, and minimal contact marks, it immediately becomes a landmark discovery. But doubling alone does not explain a value in the tens of millions. Because the most valuable 1990 60 pennies are believed to combine hub doubling with extreme planchet and plating anomalies. And this is where the story becomes truly shocking, because copper plated zinc cents rely on precise bonding between two very different metals, and when that bond fails or behaves abnormally, the results can be dramatic, including split plating, missing copper layers, exposed zinc cores, internal voids, and abnormal weight distributions. And while minor plating flaws are relatively common, extreme, clean, and well-defined failures are exceptionally rare, especially when they occur on coins that also show doubled die characteristics or unusual strike behavior. And some 1990 60 pennies show evidence of being struck on improperly plated or underplated planchets, with copper thickness far outside normal specifications, suggesting that rejected or experimental batches may have entered circulation. And when modern metallurgical analysis confirms abnormal copper thickness, bonding structure, or contamination not found in standard cents, the coin crosses from curiosity into historical artifact, because it documents a failure or experiment the mint never publicly acknowledged, and collectors place enormous value on coins that expose hidden processes, because they represent physical proof that official narratives are incomplete. And another major contributor to the extreme valuation is the possibility of wrong planchet or transitional strikes, because even in the 1990s the mint handled multiple denominations, foreign contract coins, and test blanks simultaneously, and while rare, cents struck on planchets intended for other coins or experimental purposes have been documented, and a 1990 60 penny struck on an undocumented or incorrect planchet would instantly become one of the most important modern US-era coins ever discovered, especially if its weight, diameter, density, and composition cannot be matched to any officially released coin, and modern analytical tools now allow experts to prove this beyond doubt, turning what once looked like an odd penny into a scientific anomaly with massive market impact. And then there is the issue of die deterioration, because by the mid-1990s the mint routinely pushed dies to maximize efficiency, resulting in severe die cracks, chips, cuds, and distorted design elements that transferred directly onto coins, and while minor cracks are common, a small number of 1990 60 pennies show catastrophic die failure, including massive cracks through Lincoln's portrait, warped lettering, missing design elements, or distorted memorial details on the reverse, all signs of a die at the brink of collapse. And when such dramatic die states appear on coins with other anomalies such as doubled dies or plating failures, the result is a compound error of extraordinary rarity, because multiple independent failures must occur at precisely the same moment, and rarity at that level is what drives values into the multi-million-dollar range, especially when condition is exceptional. Because most 1996 pennies entered circulation immediately, exposed to wear, scratches, and chemical damage, particularly when zinc cores became exposed, yet a tiny fraction were saved in rolls, bags, or collections, remaining untouched for decades, and when an extraordinary error survives in full mint state condition with original color, clean fields, and sharp details, it becomes almost mythical, because modern era coins rarely survive pristine, and rarity combined with preservation is the foundation of extreme value. And this is where provenance becomes essential, because a $22 million coin is not just purchased, it is investigated, documented, and debated, with its discovery story, ownership history, and expert authentication all contributing to its legitimacy, and coins discovered early, studied by respected specialists, and supported by advanced testing gain credibility that fuels intense competition among elite collectors, private museums, and investment groups. And the modern era adds another layer of intrigue, because while people assume records are complete, the reality is that supplier data, internal tests, and rejected materials were not always fully preserved, leaving gaps that only physical evidence can fill, and the 1990 60 penny exists within those gaps, a reminder that even in an age of automation and computers, human judgment, material flaws, and mechanical stress still leave permanent marks. And this is why the legend of the $22,001,996 D1 USA coin continues to grow, because it proves that treasure hunting did not end with ancient coins, it simply became more subtle, requiring knowledge, patience, and attention to detail rather than age alone. And as long as people continue to underestimate modern pennies, extraordinary examples will continue to hide in plain sight, waiting to be recognized, and somewhere out there, perhaps in a forgotten jar, an old roll, or an inherited collection, a single 1990 60 penny may exist that carries within it the perfect convergence of mistake, material, timing, and preservation, a modern coin that quietly reveals a hidden chapter of American minting history, silently holding a value of $22 million, waiting for the moment someone finally understands what it truly is. And as we continue to unfold the deeper layers of the 1990 61 cent USA coin story, it becomes increasingly clear that what truly separates this penny from millions of others struck in the same year is not just one visible flaw but a convergence of circumstances that almost feels orchestrated by chance itself. Because by the mid-1990s the US Mint had reached a level of automation that gave the illusion of total control, yet that same automation introduced new vulnerabilities, where a single unnoticed calibration error, A misfed planchet batch, or a die pushed just a little too far could affect thousands of coins before anyone realized something was wrong, and unlike earlier eras where mistakes were often obvious and quickly removed, modern errors could blend in seamlessly, hiding in plain sight among billions of near-identical cents. And this is precisely why certain 1996 pennies are only now being understood for what they truly are, because technology has finally caught up with the questions these coins have been asking silently for decades. And one of the most fascinating aspects of this coin's valuation lies in the study of microscopic strike anomalies, where under high magnification experts have identified irregular metal flow patterns, distorted grain structures, and asymmetrical pressure marks that suggest the coin was struck under abnormal conditions. Possibly during a brief window when the press was misaligned or the striking pressure was outside standard tolerances. And these kinds of anomalies cannot be faked, cannot be added later, and cannot be explained away as damage, because they are locked into the metal itself, forming a permanent record of the moment of creation. And when such strike anomalies appear alongside confirmed double die features or plating defects, they strengthen the argument that the coin originated during a moment of systemic failure rather than random chance. And systemic failures are incredibly important in numismatics, because they point to broader issues in production that were never officially disclosed, and collectors place immense value on coins that act as evidence in these silent historical investigations. And then there is the issue of weight variance, because a standard 1996 penny should fall within a very narrow weight range, yet a small number of documented examples show deviations significant enough to raise serious questions. Deviations that cannot be explained by wear alone, suggesting either abnormal zinc core density, improper copper plating thickness, or the presence of foreign material within the planchet. And when a coin's weight falls outside expected tolerances and metallurgical testing confirms internal irregularities, the implication is clear that the planchet itself was not standard, and that realization transforms the coin from a curiosity into a potentially unique artifact. And uniqueness is the ultimate driver of value, because while rare coins may have dozens of examples, unique coins stand alone, and a unique modern US coin backed by scientific proof becomes almost impossible to price using traditional methods, which is why valuations like $22 million, while shocking, begin to make sense in the context of elite collecting, where buyers are not comparing prices but competing for exclusivity. And another powerful force behind the 1996 pennies legend is the continued discovery of previously undocumented die varieties. Because as more collectors revisit modern cents with fresh eyes and better tools, subtle differences in lettering, spacing, and alignment are being identified that suggest multiple dies with unique characteristics were used, some of which may have been experimental or improperly prepared, and each new variety discovered adds fuel to the belief that more extraordinary examples may still exist, hidden in collections that have never been examined closely. And this ongoing discovery process keeps the market alive and dynamic, because uncertainty creates opportunity, and opportunity attracts attention, and attention drives value, and beyond the technical aspects there is also the human element, because the people who worked at the mint in 1996 were not abstract machines, they were individuals under pressure, meeting quotas, dealing with equipment failures, supplier delays, and administrative demands. And human systems always produce edge cases, moments where protocol bends or breaks, and those moments often leave behind physical evidence in the form of errors. And coins like the 1996 penny are believed to be the byproducts of such moments, frozen in metal, carrying with them the fingerprints of decisions made quickly and quietly. And that human connection adds another layer of appeal, because collectors are not just acquiring objects, they are preserving moments. And moments tied to real people and real challenges resonate deeply, and this is why the story of the 1996 1-cent USA coin continues to expand rather than settle, because every new piece of evidence raises new questions, and unanswered questions are the lifeblood of high-end collecting, and as long as there is uncertainty about how many extraordinary examples exist, how they were created, and whether more remain undiscovered, the coin's legend will continue to grow, sustaining valuations that seem impossible for a 1-cent piece. And ultimately this coin stands as a reminder that modern history is just as capable of producing miracles as ancient history, that value is not confined to age or precious metal content, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are born not from intention but from imperfection, and somewhere out there, perhaps already sitting unnoticed in a drawer, a box, or a forgotten roll, a single 1990 61-cent USA coin may still exist that carries every marker collectors dream of. Scientific anomaly, documented error, pristine condition, and undeniable authenticity, silently holding a value of $22 million, waiting patiently for the moment when knowledge, curiosity, and chance finally come together.